A quote from Wooly Soyinka. A fortunate blend of myth and history penetrates even deeper into that area of man's cosmogonic hunger, one which leads him to the profound forms of art as retrieval vehicles for, or assertive links with, a lost sense of origin. Hello, my friends. Today we're talking about Genesis. No, not the video game console, at least not today. No, I'm talking about a book called Genesis, Ideas of Origin in African Sculpture. Because of the state of the world right now, many of us are trying to stay at home. And because of this, I thought now would be as good a time as any to recommend another book. Originally, I was going to talk about a physical book, but instead I decided to recommend a digital book, since right now it's better that people just worry about buying essentials like food and medicine. Plus, I know a lot of people are struggling right now. A lot of people are losing their jobs, can't pay their rent, so I don't think it's a good idea to go and tell people, hey, buy some book. No, today's book is completely free. And again, that book is called Genesis, Ideas of Origin in African Sculpture, which is written by Elisa Lagama. You can find this book on the Met Museum's website. You can either download it as a PDF or you can read it online. Now, a few of my viewers may actually remember seeing this book very briefly, and that's because in the video How to Get Free Books that I did some time ago, which you should definitely check out, I happened to hold up a physical copy, and the reason I had a physical copy is because I borrowed it from my library, my college library specifically. And again, due to current events, I'm not so certain it would be a good idea to go to a library to read books right now. I really don't want to get anyone sick, so please just download the free PDF instead of going out and, getting sick. I don't want that to happen to anyone. So, yeah, just check out some stuff for free. And if you don't like this book, again, just check out my other video where I tell you about other places where you can get some free books, okay? Alrighty, the other reason I'm talking about this book today is because last time I only briefly mentioned it, and now I want to do a full review of the book. It's actually been a long while since I read this book, but I'll do my best to remember. Like any good book, it starts with an intro, and I do think you should read the introduction. Then, after that, the book is split into two parts. Part 1 is called Icons of Origin. This is the best part of the book. Definitely read this part. And then there's Part 2, The Inventions of Agriculture, Chiwara's Divine Gift, which sounds interesting, but it's not as interesting of a part as you might think, which is why you should only read that part, the second part, if you're really into African art like I am. Otherwise, I would suggest the average person just read part 1. Before the intro of this book is an artful quote that you heard at the start of our video. Let me break it down into my own layman's terms. It's basically saying that mankind creates art to represent or be linked with myths, history, and ideas of origins of peoples and the universe itself. On a kind of related note, rereading this quote reminds me of something I read in another book whose name I can't recall at the moment. It states, although some believe religion comes first and then art is made for the religion, it's possible that in history, many artworks were created first and later on a religious reason was given to justify the artwork. The former statement is not super relevant in today's book, but since I was just reminded of this fascinating dichotomy of ideas, I felt like sharing it with all of you. Now, the introduction actually has an overview of the other two parts, part 1 and part 2. And on that, I actually do highly recommend that you read the section called part 2 in the introduction. That's on page 12, because that is going to give you all sorts of information about the Bamana culture and what the Chiwara is all about. The part that I'm telling you to skip is actually on page 79. That's far later in the book. That's the actual part 2. The actual part 2 of the book, that's way later in the book, just gets into the sort of nitty-gritty details about the various versions of the Chiwara that have been made over the history of the Bamana peoples. Moving on to part 1. This area of the book is actually split into 3 sections. One is Genesis of Humanity, the other is Foundations of Kingdoms, and the last is Family Origins. Like I said, this is the best part of the book. I used some of the information in this section of the book to enrich the optional educational information that I've put into that video game that I'm working on. I've also used a bit of the information from this book in some of my videos, if I remember correctly, and I'm definitely planning to also continue to use it in the future as well for future videos. For example, in the Genesis of Humanity section, it details the origins of the Yoruba and the origins of the Dogon, and I used that information in my video game, and I've been thinking that I might also want to make videos where I tell you all about the origins of the Yoruba and the Dogon. But if you don't want to wait that long, you could just read about it yourself by reading this book. I won't hold it against you. In fact, books should be your primary source of education, and YouTube should just be a fun supplement to that education. Anyway, besides the cultures I've already mentioned, you can also read about the Kuba, the Chokwe, the Hemba, the Tabwa, and many more in this book. As a way of trying to motivate viewers to check out this book, I will now read a small excerpt from page 8. In the religion, spirituality, and thought of traditional Africa, anthropologist Dominic Zahan suggests that the quest for an explanation of the creation of man constitutes the supreme effort of the mind desirous of situating humankind in terms of certain coordinates: inorganic world, vegetable world, animal world, spiritual universe, and affirming thereby both his attachment to all these domains and his transcendent position relative to them. Zahan observes that the accounts transmitted by oral traditions always give a privileged position to man and, at least in part, to his destiny, both of which are never-ending sources of interest. At times he is made directly by divinity, at others he emerges from a reed or a tree, at still other times he rises out of the earth, or descends from the sky. Jan Vansina proposes that all these types of accounts evolve through the same process of reflection, and that, as a consequence of people's common understanding of Genesis, is often defined by more recent events. The level of specificity in these narratives tapers off as one moves back through time, and earlier periods become explained by authoritative tales of origin. Those responsible for preserving these accounts in African cultures, those who retell oral histories or create works of poetry and art, thus give individual expression to their culture's most profound collective ideas about its origins and identity. So what I just read was from the introduction of the book, but I did say that part 1 was the most interesting part, so let's exemplify this with a little reading from there, shall we? And since I mentioned the Tabwa, let's read from that section. Tabwa conceptions of origins address 2 distinct beginnings, the creation of the universe and the establishment of kinship systems. The main protagonist of the Tabwa creation story, which is set at the beginning of time when Earth was a cold, dark, and silent place, is a humanized aardvark named Matumbi. One day, while hunting, Matumbi was led on a journey through a long subterranean tunnel that took him to Leza, the supreme deity and source of light. Leza called on him to describe his existence on Earth, and sent Matumbi back to the surface with a man, a woman, and a basket of gifts. When they reached the surface, the man built a fire that brought an end to the cold and darkness. Together with the woman, he then released the contents of the basket, the sun, the moon, and the stars. Matumbi fled from all of these intense light sources, and thereafter emerged only during the cover of darkest night. The story of the origin of Tabwa society varies according to the identity and perspective of the narrator. In most versions, a progenitor or father of clans emerges from a body of water to set familial relations in motion. He becomes the model for Tabwa chieftaincy and is credited with the introduction of fire and iron smelting. The Tabwa system of descent is matrilineal. A man's heirs are not his biological children, who are considered to be in his wife's family's lineage, but rather his sister's sons. Alan F. Roberts has noted that in Luba society, which is patrilineal, ancestral veneration focuses on female figures, whereas among the Tabwa, male ancestral depictions dominate. Roberts suggests that both approaches reflect the interdependence of men and women in their respective descent systems. There's even more written in here about the Tabwa, and I encourage you to read on. And there is, of course, plenty more fascinating cultural insights in this book as well. Alrighty, my friends, that concludes today's review. Have a great day, everyone, and please try to stay safe, and if you go out, be sure to wear a mask.